Shabbat Shalom, you may be seated. So I remember once reading a story that really caught my attention. It was in the Baltimore newspaper, and it was two men who had the same name but very different fates. They were both named Westmore. One on the front page was a local student who had just received the Rhodes Scholarship, and one on the back page for another Westmore who they were searching for because he had done something bad and the police needed to find him. So it was pretty crazy. The same city, same name, same newspaper, but two completely different destinies. One was going to Oxford University and the other was getting in trouble. And so I wondered when you have the same name and you have two different fates, how does that happen? Not one dramatic moment, but a series of small choices that probably made their whole lives lead up to totally different fates, different responses to different pressures, different decisions when faced with moral crossroads. And what made me remember this story, you probably could guess, was the Parsha. Because there's a remarkably similar puzzle that's hidden beneath the surface of one sort of throwaway verse in our Parsha. So we have Balak, who's the king of Moab, who had repeatedly tried to get the prophet Balaam to curse Israel. But instead of curses, Balaam increasingly delivered powerful blessings, one that Mindy read for us, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. How great are the tents of Israel, what we say every morning. Well, when Balaam had blessed these many blessings to Israel with promises and visions of future glory, after he had done that to the Israelites, he sort of tried to prophesize the other nations. So he delivers a series of brief oracles about several people, essentially reading what the geopolitical landscape of the land of Israel was at that moment. And then there's this one strange moment that happens. Balaam looks at a very small nomadic tribe called the Kenites, and he seems surprised. And he says, "Though your abode be secure, and your nest be set among cliffs, Cain shall be consumed, Cain, when Ashur takes you captive." What does it mean that you're nomadic people, yet your abode is secure? It's a bit confusing, and the commentators also find this confusing. Why does Balaam call them out? What's he surprised by? And what makes this tribe secure? Rashi tells us that Balaam is speaking directly to Yitro. Where did Yitro come from? We'll see. Moshe's father-in-law, who's actually a descendant of the Kenites. And Rashi knew, because Rashi knows everything, that both Balaam and Yitro were with Pharaoh in Egypt at the very beginning when Pharaoh said, "It is my time to take out all of the Israelites." And now Yitro's descendants sit in positions of honor and authority in Israel's highest court, Sanhedrin, and Balaam is sort of out there blessing and cursing people. So Balaam, according to Rashi, is saying, what happened? We were in the same meeting. We both heard Pharaoh's plans to kill all the Jews, and now you and your descendants are in these high places of power in Israel, and me and my descendants are sort of struggling and making curses and blessings when it seems right to. And so this moment, this verse of prophecy, ends up being a profound meditation on moral choice. There were two advisors in the same room with the same proposal, but they had completely different responses that ended up creating completely different legacies. Ramban observes another irony here. Balaam, who thought he was so clever in his advice to Pharaoh, must now announce how wrong he was. He had just had to bless Israel, the same people who he thought should all be killed. And sometimes those who make the wrong moral choices are then forced to witness and even proclaim the success of those who made the right choice. The Hebrew text itself, which I didn't read for you, further reveals some of Balaam's shock. When he says, though your abode be secure, the word he uses for secure is etan, which has meanings of permanence and strength that seems pretty impossible for a nomadic tribe. But Balaam recognizes that Yitro's descendants found security, and it wasn't in physical foundations, because the Israelites were still in the desert, but in moral foundations. The prophet who once wielded words as weapons of curse now must speak words of blessings about those who chose righteousness. So this linguistic irony, it underscores a deeper theological truth. Those who align themselves with justice ultimately find themselves blessed, while those who choose evil find themselves compelled to acknowledge the very righteousness that they once opposed. The text forces Balaam to confront the consequences of his own moral failures. But this raised for me yet another question. What actually happened in that Egyptian council chamber? We know that both Balaam and Yitro were present when Pharaoh sought advice about the growing Israelite population. We know that they responded differently, but were they only their advisors? What were the specific choices that each person made? The Talmud fills in these gaps, revealing that there weren't just the two people there, Yitro and Balaam, but there were actually three people in Pharaoh's chamber, showing us how the same moral crisis can produce not just different outcomes, but a complete spectrum of human responses to injustice. So in Masechet Sanhedrin, there's a scene where Balaam, Job, and Yitro were all Pharaoh's advisors when Pharaoh claimed he wanted to kill all of the Jews. What did Balaam say? Balaam said, you should go and drown all of the newborn males in Egypt. And what happened to Balaam in this story? He was killed. And this was an opportunity for Balaam to gain power, to demonstrate his loyalty to a cruel Pharaoh through equal cruelty. Job, on the other hand, was silent in the chamber, and so the Talmud says that he suffered some unnamed afflictions. Perhaps he felt safer staying silent. Why risk Pharaoh's displeasure over people that weren't his own? Yitro, however, fled. He opposed the plan to kill all of the Jews, and so we know now that his descendants were eventually honored to be a part of the rabbinic court, or the Sanhedrin. So there was clearly something different at stake for Yitro. He recognized that participating in the killing of the Israelites could maybe lead to the corrupting of his soul or the destruction of his legacy. Every man calculated differently. Balaam saw opportunity, Job saw danger, and Yitro saw moral clarity. Their choices in that moment of crisis, it didn't just determine their immediate fate, but it shaped the trajectory of their future lineage. I think it's safe to say that we all face moments where we are in a place like Pharaoh's council, where we all have different options in responding to an ethical crisis. We can take Balaam's path. We can actively participate in evil that leads to destruction. We can take Job's path. We can remain silent, the seemingly easiest path, but it could carry its own price, that neutrality isn't actually neutral. Or we can take Yitro's path, one of moral courage, and possibly create a longing impact. These moments, they aren't just confined to ancient Egypt or to newspaper headlines. They happen all the time when we witness unethical practices, when we see bullying, when we ourselves encounter injustice or see injustice upon other communities. They even happen at our family dinner table when harmful stereotypes can go unchallenged, or on social media with posts that spread information. This reminded me of one of my favorite authors, Toni Morrison, who once said, "Freedom is choosing your own responsibility. It's not having no responsibilities, but it's choosing the ones you want." So when Yitro chose moral courage, he wasn't just avoiding responsibility, he was actively choosing it. He chose responsibility to justice over loyalty to power, responsibility to future generations, or immediate safety. In that moment of crisis, when Balaam chose the responsibility of ambition and Job chose the responsibility of self-preservation, Yitro chose the responsibility that would define not just his own legacy, but the moral imagination of generations to come, and actually the moral imagination that we have today. Yitro's path, it requires us to speak up even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs us something. It means preparing ourselves intellectually and spiritually and building up our community so that when our moment comes, we're ready to choose courage over comfort and justice over silence. And unfortunately, we all know that our moment almost comes way too often. I'm sure many of us can think of a moment even in the past week where the moment came, where we had to step up in moral courage. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Maybe moral courage isn't meant to be rare or an extraordinary act. Maybe it's just meant to be our daily practice. Each time we choose justice over silence or truth over convenience or compassion over indifference, we honor our own legacy, we honor Yitro's legacy, and strengthen the foundation for those who will face these same choices tomorrow. But the truth is that we don't always get it right. Sometimes we are like Balaam, choosing expedience over ethics, and that's precisely why we have in our tradition the idea of tshuva, the opportunity to turn around and choose differently. And sometimes we want to be like Job. We want to stay silent even when we feel we should speak. And we too can suffer the consequences, but Job ultimately found his way back to righteousness. But what we can do for ourselves is we can strive to be like Yitro, choosing moral clarity from the start, recognizing that our freedom is most meaningful when we use it to choose the right responsibility. The real question isn't whether we'll face these moments. We will. Maybe the moment I turn my phone on after Shabbat tonight. The question is whether we'll be ready, whether we'll have cultivated moral clarity to see beyond immediate consequences to our lasting impact. So this Shabbat, may we find the strength to keep choosing responsibility to justice, knowing that our choices today can echo throughout all generations to come, creating ripples of righteousness or alternatively waves of regret. The choice is ours. Shabbat Shalom.